The other small bit of information we have about Maximus's motivation comes from the general's resume. See, in particular, that under previous work experience, we have him down as serving in North Africa under Theodosius the Elder during the Revolt of Firmus, and before that, we have him down as very likely serving on the campaign to resecure Britain after the barbarian invasions of 367-368, also under Theodosius the Elder. In other words, Maximus was a longtime friend, ally, and compatriot of the Theodosian family. His relationship with the younger Theodosius, 15 years his junior, would have gone back to the earliest stages of the now emperor's career, and given the tone of his correspondence with the Eastern Augustus immediately following the demise of Gratian, it is clear that not only did Maximus expect Theodosius to recognize him as the new Augustus of the West, but he expected Theodosius to be happy about it. When weighing the pros and cons of revolt, the fact that an old friend was now Emperor of the East had to have been seen by Maximus as a huge, possibly decisive, pro. But before we get into the revolt of Maximus, I want to back up a little bit and introduce a man who was going to be right smack dab in the middle of it all. And not just right smack dab in the middle of the revolt, mind you, though he was right smack dab in the middle of the revolt, but right smack dab in the middle of everything that happens in the last quarter of the 4th century. State, church, diplomacy, war, peace, you name it, there he is. I speak, of course, of the man you just knew was going to pop up eventually, Aurelius Ambrosius, better known to us as St. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan. Not to get off on too meta of a tangent, but I tend to see history as an interplay between broad socioeconomic factors and the specific actions of key individuals. Sometimes socioeconomic factors take the lead, like, say, the way the potato famine drove Irish migration to North America in the 1840s. Sometimes the two walk in lockstep, like, say, the way the conditions of post-World War I Germany made the rise of fascism possible, but that the specific and malevolent idiosyncrasies of Hitler defined the form that it took. And sometimes the end drives the ox cart of history for a while. Ambrose of Milan was a driver. He was a staunch anti-pagan, he was a staunch anti-Arian, and he believed that all men, emperors included, must kneel before God. When he died in 397, his specific beliefs had more or less become the entrenched imperial worldview. Even more importantly than that, had it not been for Ambrose, it is possible that 1,000 years of argument over whether state was superior to church or church was superior to state might never have occurred, because the church's case never would have gotten off the ground. Any other man serving as Bishop of Milan in the late 4th century, and the whole world turns out differently, I think. He was that big of a deal. And even if you don't believe any of that, at a minimum, you can blame him for the fact that we all have to read selected portions of the City of God for the umpteenth time for the test on Friday. And I can't tell you how much I'd like to shake his hand for that. Ambrose was born in the late 330s AD in the imperial capital of Trier, and was the son of a Praetorian prefect. So the future bishop's life is not a rags to riches story, so much as it is a riches to more riches story. Given the hereditary laws in place at the time, the fact that his father was such a high-ranking civil servant meant that Ambrose was destined for a career in the imperial bureaucracy. Which leads us to one of the more interesting facts about Ambrose for someone who knows nothing about him. He never was a priest. He had no intention of ever becoming a priest, and when he was elected Bishop of Milan, he had never served in the church in any official capacity. He hadn't even been baptized yet. Young Ambrose was sent to Rome to get the full classical education, and he excelled in every subject he touched: grammar, rhetoric, law, philosophy, whatever. We don't have good records for what he did after he came of age, beyond the fact that he established a reputation for himself of being a brilliant orator and an excellent lawyer. We next find him in the early 370s being appointed consular prefect of the northern Italian administrative districts of Aemilia and Liguria. This prefecture just so happened to be headquartered in Milan, which meant that Ambrose, now in his mid to late 30s, became well known to the court of Valentinian, and his political future looked bright. He was popular with the people, respected by his peers, and marked for promotion by his superiors. But then his life and career and world history took an unexpected turn. In 374, the sitting bishop of Milan died. Now, the sitting bishop just so happened to have been of Arian persuasion, which had rankled the majority Nicene population of the city. Now that the bishop was dead, this majority naturally wanted the next bishop to be chaste, moral, and above all, a staunch Nicene. But the Arian minority population, who just so happened to be supported by Valentinian's wife Justina, wanted the next bishop to be an Arian, just like the old bishop had been. And so the Christian population of Milan started a fight with itself, and of course, no one was willing to give an inch. In his capacity as consular prefect, Ambrose showed up on the day that the new bishop was to be elected, with the sole objective of keeping the peace. He had reason to believe he might be able to keep a lid on things, since he was respected by both sides. Though a Nicene by disposition, Ambrose had always been tolerant of Arianism in his role as prefect, and so everyone saw him as an honest broker. When the election started to get out of hand, Ambrose stepped in to see if he couldn't settle everyone down. And then, someone in the crowd had a bright idea, and they shouted, "Ambrose for bishop." This cry was then taken up by the whole assembly. Everyone suddenly agreed that Ambrose was the perfect compromise candidate. Everyone, that is, except Ambrose himself, who begged and pleaded with the crowd to please think up a different solution. He knew no theology, he was no priest, he hadn't even been baptized yet. But the calls for his elevation persisted. So Ambrose did the prudent thing. He hightailed it out of there and went into hiding. A week later, he was still in hiding when a message signed by the young Emperor Gratian began making the rounds. Apparently, the Emperor fully supported the wise decision to make the eminently capable consular prefect bishop. Ambrose was stuck, and he knew it. So he came out of hiding, went and got baptized, and became the new bishop of Milan. An unconventional path to the cloth for sure, but once he got there, boy howdy did he ever make the most of it. Now on a normal day, being the Bishop of Milan meant having a healthy degree of influence. After all, you were the most powerful Christian official in the most important imperial capital in the Western Empire. But after just a year in office, it stopped being a normal day for Ambrose. Because in 375, Valentinian I suddenly died, and his youngest son, Valentinian II, was elevated to the rank of Augustus. When the imperial court had left Milan in 374 heading east, it had been led by a domineering general who had been in office for more than a decade. When it returned, it was led by a 4-year-old. Now, for a variety of reasons, the Roman imperial system rarely strayed into child emperors, which meant that when it did, there was no agreed-to precedent for how to handle the situation. Basically, that meant that a variety of powerful ministers would jockey with each other for power until a few emerged triumphant from the backrooms as the de facto heads of state. In the case of young Valentinian II, the emergent leaders of the Milan court turned out to be the Empress Justina and the Heap of Milan, who managed to talk his way right into the heart of the imperial government. This is interesting for its own sake, but it's also interesting because Justina was a staunch Arian, while Ambrose was an Orthodox Nicaean. If you don't think the fact that the two most powerful figures in Milan are on opposite sides of a hugely contentious religious feud is going to cause problems, well, you just don't know highly contentious religious feuds. But wait, you say, I thought Ambrose was sympathetic to the Arians. I thought he was an honest broker. Well, yes he was, when he was consular prefect. But now that he was bishop, he felt he had an obligation to defend the one true faith with every means at his disposal. Almost overnight, Ambrose became a Nicene extremist. But Ambrose's influence did not stop at the city limits of Milan. The bishop's silver tongue began to influence the religious policies of the not much more than a boy himself, Emperor Gratian. This meant, first of all, that the previously ambivalent Gratian adopted Nicene Christianity, but it also meant, second of all, that Ambrose's strong anti-pagan views began to show up in imperial edicts being issued from Gratian's court in Trier. Though most of the high officials, leading ministers, top generals, and even rank-and-file troops had come over to Christianity in the last 50 years, the rural areas of the empire were still mostly untouched by the urban Christian revolution. And down in Rome, the old Italian senatorial class was still fiercely committed to their traditional religions. Since the days of Constantine, the emperors had adopted a policy of indifference toward the paganism of the rural poor, and a policy of toleration toward the paganism of the Italian aristocracy. The former posed no political threat and so could be safely ignored, while the latter posed such a political threat that it was better to let sleeping dogs lie. But the bold and ambitious Ambrose decided that that wasn't good enough. Either Christianity was the truth, or it was not. If it was, then why do we tolerate demonic paganism in any form? And if it was not, then what are we doing here? So, at Ambrose's prodding, Gratian started to come down hard on Roman paganism, targeting previously untouchable institutions like the priesthood of Jupiter and the Vestal Virgins. These were the zero-hour foundational cults of Rome that were the bedrock of Roman civilization. They predated the Republic, for crying out loud. Gratian ignored the pleas of the Italians and ordered all public financing for the cults cut off. Starved of funding, these ancient priesthoods would limp on for a few more years until Theodosius would finally put them out of their misery once and for all. But the most controversial anti-pagan edict that Gratian issued came in 382, when the emperor ordered the Altar of Victory removed from the Senate House. The famous gold statue of the winged Nike had been captured by the Romans way back during their war with Pyrrhus, and installed in the Senate House by Octavian to celebrate his victory at Actium. The statue was widely seen as the personification of Rome's imperial power. To remove it was not just a question of sacrilege, it was a question of national security. A passionate debate erupted between Ambrose and Symmachus, the most powerful individual senator of the day, which ended, of course, with victory for Ambrose. The altar was removed. Now, the Altar of Victory would be restored during the short, unrecognized reign of Eugenius, but it would be removed again by Theodosius when he captured control of the whole empire, this time for good.